4:17 a.m., January 5, 2026. The darkness over eastern Belarus is ripped apart by light. At Krytvev-6 airbase, what was supposed to be Russia's most untouchable military asset is no longer a weapon at all. It's a towering inferno. A 1,000-foot column of fire climbs into the winter sky, so bright it turns night into dawn. The blast waves roll outward in heavy pulses, rattling buildings and tripping seismic sensors hundreds of miles away, as far as Poland. This isn't a single explosion. It's a chain reaction, one violent detonation feeding the next, as Russia's hypersonic missile stockpile burns itself alive. Ukraine didn't intercept a Mach 10 missile in flight. They did something far worse. They ignited the entire arsenal on the ground, turning billions of dollars worth of invincible weapons into an uncontrollable furnace before Moscow even understood it was under attack. And the most unsettling part? This wasn't a massive air raid. No squadrons crossed borders. No pilots flew into enemy airspace. The entire catastrophe was triggered by just 2 F-16 seconds operating safely from Ukrainian skies, backed by 10 small, inexpensive drones. That's it. To understand how something this devastating could happen, you have to rewind a few weeks, back to late December 2025. While the world was distracted by holiday news cycles, satellite intelligence was quietly tracking unusual activity at Krytvev-6, a forgotten Soviet-era base sitting barely 250 miles from Ukraine's northern border. This wasn't a routine deployment. It was a statement. Vladimir Putin was moving his newest strategic showpiece, the first fully operational battery of the Oreshnik hypersonic missile system, onto foreign soil. For anyone not glued to Kremlin press briefings, the Oreshnik was advertised as the ultimate endgame weapon, a solid fuel monster capable of re-entering the atmosphere at Mach 10, over 7,600 miles per hour. Each missile carried multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicles, meaning a single launch could strike 6 different cities at once. Putin called it unstoppable, immune to Western air defenses once it reached altitude. By parking 10 of these launchers in Belarus, Russia wasn't just posturing, it was placing a loaded blade at the throat of Europe. And they didn't leave them exposed. Krytvev-6 was transformed into a fortress, a layered textbook defense designed to make any attack suicidal. 3 battalions of S-400 Triumph systems formed the outer shield, their massive radars capable of tracking hundreds of targets simultaneously. Beneath that, a dense inner ring of Panzer S-1 and Tor M2 systems guarded against low-altitude threats. On paper, this was an impenetrable, no-fly zone. Any conventional military planner would have crossed this target off the list. Ukraine's command didn't. They weren't looking for a dogfight, they weren't trying to break the shield head-on. They understood something far more important. Russia had spent an entire year, billions of dollars, and tens of thousands of labor hours to concentrate all 10 Oreshnik launchers in one place. That concentration was the weakness. The plan was brutally simple and dangerously patient. Don't strike when the launchers arrive. Don't hit them on the road. Wait until every single missile is fueled, loaded, parked, and vulnerable at the same time. To execute this, Ukraine assembled a specialized strike package. 2 F-16 Block 70, 72 Vipers, the most advanced variants available, and 10 long-range one-way attack drones. But the real trick, the mistake Russian planners never anticipated, was that these jets were never going to fly into the teeth of the S-400 seconds. The battle wasn't about penetration, it was about manipulation. As the sun dipped below the horizon on January 4th, the first pieces were already moving. 11 p.m., a quiet, isolated stretch of tarmac near Chernihiv. The silence breaks as gasoline engines come to life, low and steady. These are Ukraine's long-range strike drones, cheap, expendable, and lethal in numbers. As they lift off, they don't climb into radar coverage. They dive, leveling out at barely 140 feet above the ground. At that altitude, they disappear into terrain, trees, and the curvature of the earth itself, slipping beneath the S-400's massive search radars. For hours, they fly like ghosts, guided by hardened inertial systems and anti-jamming GPS, correcting their course thousands of times per second with cold mathematical precision. But drones alone wouldn't be enough. They needed a distraction. Something loud, something terrifying, something that would force Russian operators to react on instinct rather than logic. That role belonged to F-16 number 1, call sign Wild Weasel. This jet never crosses the border. It doesn't have to. Loitering safely inside Ukrainian airspace, it carries a payload designed not to destroy, but to deceive. Under its wings are AGM-88 HARMs and, more importantly, 2 ADM-160 MAL-J decoy jammers. These aren't simple decoys. They're programmable actors capable of mimicking the radar signature of entire formations. At 3:45 a.m., the Wild Weasel releases them. On Russian radar screens at Krytvev 6, reality shatters. The operators don't see two small objects. They see what looks like a full American-style strike package. Multiple high-altitude aircraft screaming toward the base at 25,000 feet. Alarms erupt. Sirens cut through the frozen night. Adrenaline takes over. The S-400 crews react exactly as they've been trained to do. Lock, fire, 6 interceptor missiles, each costing around $2 million, blast into the sky, chasing nothing but digital phantoms. While the Russian crews celebrate their kills, their launch tubes sit empty, locked into a 45-minute reload cycle. And beneath all of this chaos, the real threat is still crawling forward at treetop height, completely untouched. That's when the second act begins. As the first wave of drones reaches the inner perimeter, they suddenly climb. Not to escape detection, but to invite it. Panzer and Tor systems snap to life, guns roaring, missiles streaking upward. The air fills with tracer fire and exploding fragments as Russian crews pour everything they have into shooting down cheap disposable targets. This is saturation warfare in its purest form. Each defense system can only track and engage so many targets at once, and Ukraine is deliberately pushing them past that limit. Sensors overload, operators tunnel vision, reload timers begin ticking. And while every eye on the base is focused on the sky directly above them, 60 miles away, F-16 number 2 is waiting. Call sign Sniper. This jet is silent, low, and patient. Under its wings are the real executioners, AGM-158 Jassimer stealth cruise missiles. Not bombs, precision instruments, each one shaped to scatter radar waves, flying so low they blend into terrain clutter, guided by internal maps and imaging infrared seekers that don't care about jamming. When the sniper releases them, they drop even lower than the drones, skimming the earth at 50 feet, invisible to distracted defenses. Inside the Oreshnik bunkers, crews are scrambling. Fuel hoses are still connected. Heavy blast doors are beginning to open as commanders realize, too late, that the sky is no longer under their control. Mobile launchers start to move, slow and clumsy, 50-ton machines trying to escape a trap that has already closed. The missiles are 90 seconds out. Inside the bunker, the air smells of ozone, fuel, and panic. Outside, soldiers reload with shaking hands, some firing rifles uselessly into the darkness, hoping for miracles. The JASSMs don't slow down. Their seekers lock onto the heat signatures of ventilation shafts, making micro-adjustments no human could ever replicate. The first missile doesn't explode on impact. It penetrates 20 feet of reinforced concrete before detonating exactly where it was designed to. What follows isn't just an explosion, it's physics taking over. Solid rocket fuel ignites. Temperature spike beyond 5,000 degrees. Pressure builds faster than structures can fail. Steel doors tear free. Fire erupts skyward in a violent, unnatural color visible from orbit. And as burning launchers attempt to flee into the trees, the final wave of drones descends, one by one, turning escape routes into firestorms. flipping vehicles, rupturing fuel tanks, ensuring nothing of value leaves the base intact. Behind it all, two F-16 seconds bank away, untouched, as the horizon burns brighter by the second. The glow behind them keeps growing, a furious orange wound on the horizon that refuses to fade. Even as the jets disappear into the darkness, the fire at Krytvev 6 takes on a life of its own. Inside the shattered bunkers, the remaining Oreshnik missiles are no longer weapons, they're fuel. One by one, their solid rocket motors begin to cook off, not exploding all at once, but igniting in sequence, like a line of industrial furnaces being switched on. Each ignition adds more pressure, more heat, more violence, until the entire complex becomes a single, unstable system feeding itself. The ground trembles again and again, small quakes pulsing outward, confusing civilian monitoring stations across Eastern Europe that suddenly register what looks like an earthquake where no fault line exists. On the base itself, any sense of command has collapsed. Radios scream over one another, orders contradict, then fall silent as antennas melt or are simply blown away. Survivors stagger through smoke so thick it feels solid, their night vision goggles useless against the blinding white heat. Fire suppression systems activate automatically, dumping foam and suppressant into corridors that no longer exist, instantly vaporizing on contact. This is the nightmare scenario Russian engineers warned about on paper but never believed would happen in reality. A hypersonic missile battery destroyed not by precision interception, but by internal thermal runaway.
Once it starts, there is nothing left to control.
In Minsk, emergency lines light up within minutes. Regional commanders struggle to understand the scale of what they're seeing on satellite feeds. At first, they assume it's a fuel depot accident, maybe a secondary explosion triggered by a drone strike. Then the infrared imagery updates. The heat signature isn't fading, it's growing. Analysts watch in disbelief as individual hotspots merge into one massive thermal bloom, large enough to drown out everything around it. Someone finally says it out loud: the entire Oreshnik stockpile is burning. Not damaged, not partially disabled, gone. Back in Ukraine, the command center remains eerily quiet. No cheers, no raised voices, just officers standing over live feeds, watching the fire expand frame by frame. Seismic data scrolls across screens, numbers confirming what the eyes already know. Structural integrity, 0. Operational capability, 0. Krytvev 6 has crossed the point of no return. The technicians log the timestamps carefully, knowing that every second of data will later be dissected by allies, analysts, and historians. This isn't just a successful strike, it's a case study that will be taught for decades. As the flames climb higher, a new problem emerges for the Russians still on the ground. Toxic clouds, burning propellant, metals, and chemicals begin drifting with the wind. Evacuation orders are issued too late and too vaguely. Nearby units pull back in confusion, unsure how far is far enough. Roads clog with vehicles trying to flee a base that no longer resembles a military installation, but a volcanic crater in progress. Somewhere in the chaos, a damaged launcher finally detonates completely, sending a shockwave that flattens what little infrastructure remains standing on the eastern edge of the compound. In Moscow, the situation briefing is delayed again and again. No one wants to be the first to walk into that room with a clear answer. Early reports are softened, words carefully chosen: incident, fire, temporary loss of functionality. But raw satellite imagery doesn't lie, and neither do Allied intelligence feeds already circulating among NATO capitals. Within hours, defense analysts from Washington to Berlin are staring at the same images, an unmistakable signature of solid fuel missile destruction on a massive scale. Phones start ringing, quiet conversations begin. Not celebratory ones, but deeply serious ones. Because what just happened at Krytvev 6 isn't only a Russian loss, it's a precedent. For decades, hypersonic weapons were sold as inevitabilities, too fast to advance, too terrifying to counter. Nations poured fortunes into them under the assumption that speed alone equaled dominance. But this firestorm tells a different story. It shows that the most advanced weapon on Earth is still helpless when it's concentrated, predictable, and sitting still. It shows that layered defenses, no matter how expensive, can be bent, distracted, and exhausted by creativity and timing. and it shows that the weakest-looking tools, cheap drones, decoys, clever software, can open doors that brute force never could. Even as dawn approaches, Crit Vev 6 continues to burn. The flames finally begin to sag inward, not because the fire is dying, but because there is less left to consume. Deep underground, concrete collapses into itself as supports fail, sealing bunkers forever. Whatever wasn't vaporized is now entombed. Rescue teams are ordered to stand down. There is nothing to rescue, and nothing worth saving. And as the smoke drifts east, away from the border, one question starts to echo quietly through military headquarters around the world. If a fully defended hypersonic battery can be erased in minutes while sitting behind its shields, what else right now only feels invincible because no one has tried hard enough yet? By mid-morning, the fire at Crit Vev 6 finally begins to collapse in on itself. Not because it has been extinguished, but because there is nothing left to burn. The towering flame shrinks into a dense, boiling column of smoke that climbs slowly into the winter sky, carrying with it the remains of Russia's most prized weapons program. What once stood as a symbol of unstoppable power is now a scorched crater ringed by twisted steel, melted concrete, and the silent wreckage of launchers that will never fire. Emergency crews remain at a distance, powerless, watching heat shimmer above the ground like a warning sign etched into the earth itself. Within hours, the narrative begins to shift. Russian state media issues a brief, carefully worded statement citing a technical incident during routine maintenance. No mention of hypersonic missiles, no acknowledgement of losses, but the world has already seen the truth. Commercial satellites capture the aftermath in brutal clarity, and intelligence agencies quietly confirm what the images suggest. 10 launchers, 0 survivors, an entire strategic battery erased in a single night. In closed-door meetings across Europe, officials speak in hushed tones, not out of fear, but out of realization. Something fundamental has changed. In Kyiv, there is no victory parade, no public announcement. The operation never gets a name. It doesn't need one. The pilots are debriefed, the data archived, and the drones that never returned are quietly written off. For Ukraine, this wasn't about spectacle or revenge. It was about removing a threat before it could ever be used. The mission is logged as complete, and attention shifts immediately to what comes next, because modern war does not pause to celebrate. For Moscow, the consequences are far heavier. Replacing the Oreshnik battery isn't a matter of issuing orders or writing checks. The components are rare. The supply chains are fractured. Sanctions tighten around industries that were already struggling to keep up. Engineers know the truth even if politicians won't say it aloud. Rebuilding what burned at Crit Vev 6 will take years, not months. And the psychological damage, the sudden loss of faith in a weapon once believed untouchable, may never fully heal. Across the world, military planners rewrite assumptions. Hypersonic speed no longer feels like a shield. Fixed bases feel suddenly fragile. Expensive centralized systems begin to look less like deterrents and more like liabilities. The lesson is uncomfortable, but unmistakable. Dominance no longer belongs solely to whoever builds the fastest missile. It belongs to whoever understands the battlefield better, who knows when to strike, where to strike, and how to let an enemy's own confidence become the weapon that destroys them. As the sun sets over Belarus that evening, the crater at Crit Vev 6 cools for the first time since the blast. Smoke thins, the land grows quiet. What happened there will never be officially admitted, never fully explained, and never repeated in public speeches. But every major power on Earth will study it in silence. Because on January 5th, 2026, the world learned a hard truth. The future of warfare wasn't decided at Mach 10 in the sky. It was decided on the ground, in the dark, by patience, deception, and a handful of machines that proved even the most feared weapons in history can still burn.